I don't know that you ever get over it. And in fact, the saying of time heals all wounds. How cute is that? No, time doesn't heal all wounds. It helps separate you from the wound, right? Like your memory gets foggier. You start to fill the gaping hole with other things. But like, I don't know that you ever really heal yourself. You can work on healing. But yeah, I think grief and loss is always there in the background, at least in my experience.
How do you process grief after loss? For how long is it okay to be grieving? For me, honestly, I'm still trying to figure that out as I continue to grieve some losses over the past year. Some of us cry or seek emotional support. Some of us seek solitude or different types of expression. And for many, grief doesn't go away, and that's okay. Tim here, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Invisible Condition podcast, where we talk about advocacy and unusually normal things, the conditions, diseases, and illnesses we live with. We will end the stigma of invisible conditions by empowering voices, and today's voice is brought to us by Deanne. And a quick content warning that some of the conversation may be triggering to some. Deanne experienced multiple losses within a short time. Listening to this episode will offer you a direct look into how people deal with grief and loss, highlighting the power of a shared personal story for healing. It's impactful and shows us the reality of struggle and the importance of support, making this a very useful listen to anyone facing tough times or trying to understand what others go through. Have a listen. Hey, Deanne, welcome to the Invisible Condition podcast. I love that we connected through LinkedIn. Complete strangers, had never met. And here we are. We've had a few conversations now and we're recording. So I'm just excited to host you on the show.
Same. I'm the lucky one. I've enjoyed your posts so much. That's what drew me to reach out to you on LinkedIn. Your vulnerability has been inspiring. So I'm humbled to be here. Thank you.
It's I know you've got your own podcast, and I'm not going to tell the audience about it. I'm going to let you do that. And but before we get into the content today, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
What motivated you to start your podcast?
Yeah, I am a mom. I have 3 boys with me at home, and yes, I have a podcast. I have a history in HR, and the podcast is called Effing Up. And it's about the career journey, and that it's not, always up and to the right. It's not an overnight success. And it's discussing the real journey of successful individuals and not the 1% of successful individuals that, we could only dream of being and get so lucky to achieve. That's not realistic, right? It's the everyday successful individuals. And so asking those guests some hard probing questions to talk about their journey and be vulnerable and share the pitfalls along the way and setting their success on the shelf, so to speak, to have those conversations. And that came out of my own really trying time. Within a span of 45 days, I lost my aunt, who was a sister, mother figure, really a best friend to me. I was pregnant at the time, so really, struggled to keep positive. And so I mentioned the 45 days. I ended up losing that baby at 21 weeks pregnant. Exactly a week later, my 2-year-old was hospitalized. And then I had a career of 8.5 years at a startup. I have a history of being an HR executive. That came to a close. And it was really a rough road. I had a hard time just being, and wanted to give myself an outlet to make sure I got up and got out of bed, because I didn't really know how to make that happen. And the one thing I was doing consistently was taking walks. And during those walks, I'd be like, okay, Deanne, what are we doing here? How are you going to, get through life? And coming up with this podcast was, really think the thing that saved me. It used my HR judgy background, if you will, in interviewing, and gave me an opportunity to connect with people, which is really important to me. And it allows me to have really deep conversations, which, if you know me, you know that I hate small talk. I like to dive right in and get to know someone at their core. So it gave me all those things, and it gave me, something to check boxes and get to work on. And I mentioned my job came to a close, so I had a little bit of time. I was fortunate to have that time. So I started building, and here we are.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
That's a lot to happen in a short period of time. And we're going to be talking today about grief after loss, and that's a lot of loss. A loss in a short period of time, a loss of your mother figure, of a miscarriage, and your child being in the hospital and losing your job. And we all process grief differently. And so you alluded to a few things where you had walks consistently, and you had started this project out of that to kind of give you that purpose. When you hear about navigating grief and loss, what comes to mind?
What comes to mind is it's a joke. I mean, if I'm completely honest, I think that everyone's looking for, like, feeling even emotional just thinking about it. Like, everyone's looking for the silver bullet. Like, how can I be okay? How can I get over it? Newsflash, like, it just doesn't work like that. I mean, everyone's wired differently. So some people can bounce back super easy. Some people will struggle much longer. And so when I think about it, I just think, well, like, how ridiculous, like, getting over it. I don't know that you ever get over it. And in fact, the saying of time heals all wounds. How cute is that? No, time doesn't heal all wounds. It helps separate you from the wound, right? Like, your memory gets foggier. You start to fill the gaping hole with other things. But, like, I don't know that you ever really heal yourself. You can work on healing, but yeah, I think grief and loss is always there in the background, at least in my experience.
Well, I completely agree. And my mind automatically goes to all those quote unquote gurus on social media of, like, overcome grief, overcome loss, and, sign up to my course for only whatever amount of money. And yes, I think, I don't think it goes away.
Correct. Yeah.
I've talked to a few people now who've experienced loss and profound loss, and it's there. It doesn't go away. However, like you said, that time in between, like you said, your memory might get a little foggier, but things might come up and might trigger that emotion.
Oh, yeah.
And you started your podcast, and was it a way to cope with what you were going through? Was it a way of, like, hey, I'm going to stick it to the world, and I'm going to show that I've got purpose? I'm curious about it.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of things. I think it was, I need something to occupy my time, just frankly, like, I don't know what to do with myself, and I have this flexibility of time. So how will I fill it? Because I know if it's idle, like, I was getting out of bed, but it was just sheer guilt of, like, what will my husband think? How will my kids, survive without me? And what will they think of their mother if I don't show up? So the podcast was like a necessity of time filling, if you will. Stick it to the world. I don't think it was that. I do love that perspective, though. Like, I am like, I love attention, but I love controlled attention. So it definitely wasn't stick it to the world. But I do think it was like, I need to be doing something. I need to feel satisfied. And it seemed to be the only thing that kept coming to my mind that made me feel like I could handle life, if that makes sense. There was lots of tasks associated with getting it done. Like I've never podcasted before ever. So I had to figure that out. Right. And so that gave me purpose. It was like, okay, I have something I need to go out and do. And, then I started recording and I had to start finding guests and I had to network, and it just kept me busy. It made me not think about all the other things. I mean, I was thinking about the other things, don't get me wrong, but it just, I think, helped replace, fill the gaps. I don't even know how to articulate it, but yeah, I would say it would just, it was a time filler, really.
Well, I think you articulated it very well. I personally, I haven't experienced a lot of loss in my life. And I was reflecting on that, where in our family, we've lost some grandparents and so having not really experienced that, and I started thinking loss in a little different context of like, okay, loss of ability. With Crohn's, I lost my ability to play with my kids.
Sure.
I'd lost my ability to work. And when your identity is wrapped up in that, there's a lot of grieving and loss in that. But it's often invisible. And I know, definitely not comparing, losses here. We process loss differently and it's invisible. And I know people are listening to this have experienced loss, whether it is loss of a job, loss of family, miscarriage, loss of ability. We don't talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
It's, as a guest recently said, it's almost like a taboo subject. We don't talk about it because,
absolutely.
Is it because we don't know how? And I'm curious from your perspective, should we be talking about it, and why don't we talk about it?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. We should be talking about it. But to expand further, the problem is that we as humans cannot just listen. So when you start talking about it, people want to solutionize. They want to fix your problems. They just like, if you're like, I'm really sad today, my hamster died. Let's just be very basic. People are like, oh, but he's in a better place. He's not suffering. It's like, okay, but I'm sad and I just want to be sad. I actually don't want to think about whether or not he's in a better place because he might be in hamster hell. I mean, we could debate this all day long. Like, I miss my hamster, right? And we, as humans, cannot live in silence, cannot just sit there and be like, Tim, I'm sorry about your hamster. Tell me more about your hamster, So that's one thing. Another thing is there is an expiration for how long you can talk about your hamster. And there's not even a pamphlet that tells you what that expiration of time is, right? But as society, we all have our own time frame. And it's just like so second nature of like, why is that person still talking about the hamster? Like, we've talked about the hamster 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 years, whatever it is, right? But you start to feel like, okay, let's move on. Or you've forgotten it because it's not your hamster. So you don't ask, you don't think about it. So you don't know that they're thinking about it. Or I might think, oh yeah, Tim's hamster died last week. I wonder how he's doing. Ooh, I shouldn't ask because then Tim will start thinking about it and I don't want to make him sad. Newsflash, Tim's still thinking about the hamster. Like, maybe I shouldn't have used the hamster because this is sounding ridiculous now. But like, you're still thinking about it. Like, for someone like me that had that much loss, I'm thinking about it every day. Like, that happened in spring of 22 and I still think about it every day. I come to tears almost every day still. And so for someone to think, well, I don't want to bring it up because it might make her sad or it might hurt her. I don't know what to say. Like, you're protecting your feelings. You're not protecting my feelings. And if you care about me, you should ask. And by the way, I've been horrible about this because I'm part of that same society, right? Like, I have been conditioned to feel afraid to ask about it as well and uncomfortable. That's the major overlay here, is that we're all very uncomfortable. Like, what will I say? How should I respond? You don't need to. You just sit with them. Just sit with what they're saying and be comfort. That's really, we just want to be seen and heard. And I don't think we're capable of this until we actually recognize these things that I've mentioned, that we don't know how to respond. We don't know how to not solutionize if we do respond, right? Like, we just need help as a society to figure it out. But I think talking about it would certainly be helpful, because we feel like we can't talk about it. And then you internalize everything and we wonder why we're all unhappy.
Yeah, it's so true. There's so many thoughts rolling through my mind as you're telling that story, and about my fictitious hamster. So if you are listening, if you're like, hey, what's going on with Tim's hamster? I don't have a hamster, but if I did, I've had pets and mourn the loss of those pets. We've had significant loss in our family due to fire, and you still mourn that. We've lost family members and friends, and we mourn that. And
that's rough.
There's things that trigger, and it's like, there's no time limit. You could be walking down the street and a smell or a sight can trigger that grief.
Yeah.
And so when we first met, when we first connected to kind of talk about an episode, we talked about, you mentioned, I just wanted someone to listen. And that's such a reoccurring theme, where we're humans, and I'm generalizing here, where we hear a problem and we want to fix it. My background is operations management, process improvement. So I want to fix it. I want to get to the root of the problem. I want to solve that root problem.
You were born to fix it. Yeah.
Fix it and just like, we're going to move on. And I was thinking about that yesterday of, it's impossible. So if we go into that with that mindset of, I'm going to listen to Deanne, I'm going to listen to Tim, I'm going to listen to my friend, and they're going to tell us their story maybe of grief. And my mind is already jumping ahead to how I can fix that. You're not actually listening. You're solutioning.
Yeah.
And this concept of active listening is, there's one theory of like multiple levels of active listening, and like getting to that, like hearing the words. And that's all that's permeating your brain, is just those words. I don't know how to get there. I'm stuck in this. I'm guilty of this myself. And so when you say there's no time limit to grief, and yet we feel that people say, okay, it's time to move on. How do we handle that conversation? How do we navigate that, aside from just internalizing it?
I mean, I think it depends on who you're talking to, right? In my own experience, I'm a very direct individual. Those that know me, I'm not afraid to share my feelings. So, like with my husband, we've had very honest conversations about like, I'm struggling today. I'm not doing well. It seems like you're not struggling at all. What's going on? And then, we dissect that and talk about just like how grief is different, and how, like, with the loss of our baby, was very physical for me, right? Like, I carried the baby, I gained the weight, like I had the things that happened after the loss that, my partner didn't experience, because he was not physically carrying the baby. So the reminders are a lot more present for me. And, I'm lucky to have someone that will meet me where I'm at, and that I can have those very hard conversations with. In society, we're afraid to say things sometimes because we're afraid we're going to lose that person, right? And if I have these conversations with my husband and he doesn't want to have those conversations and he wants to walk away, then I guess he wasn't that great for me anyway. It's like easier said than done, right? But I think if you need help, if you want support, you have to be willing to ask. I'm not good at this outside of my husband. Like I don't do well with this with my friends. I don't do well with this with other family members. And unfortunately, because of that, I think my friends don't know how to support me. In fact, I've been told, like, well, you're the rock, Deanne. So when something happens to you, like, what do we do? And it's like, whoa, that's not really fair,
That's
right?
A little bit of pressure.
Right. So I think in the same way that I'm willing to talk to my husband, I have to be willing to talk to others. I've gotten better at this because I've been forced. I've forced myself. And so the few that I trust, I'll open up to and share. And if I don't get the response I need, then I guess they weren't really the friend for me. And that's really, it's like spiraling grief, right? It's tough, but I think you have to ask for help in the way that you need help. And if you don't know, then just say it. Like, I don't feel good and I need you to know that. And I don't even know what to say beyond this. And hopefully your person that you're talking to will meet you where you're at and you can work it out together. Hopefully.
Yeah. My wife and I, we've been married 13 years and we'll start a conversation with this. I just need you to listen, or this is a listening conversation.
That's productive. Yeah.
I know in my mind, I'm like, okay, I better keep my mouth closed and just be quiet and listen. And I could have, in my opinion, the 13 of the best solutions. But that's not what she needs.
Yeah.
She needs me to listen. And that is, I think, sound advice for the strangers on social media who want to jump to a solution without understanding what we're going through, or the friends in our circle of, hey, I'm grieving. I've experienced something. I just need someone to listen. I don't need solutions. I don't need, 13 self-help book recommendations because I'm not going to read them. I don't need inspirational quotes. I've got enough. I just need people. I just want someone to listen.
Yeah.
And
And one big solution that people love to offer or push, however you want to look at it, is, are you talking to someone? You should really be talking to someone. And no, I'm not talking to someone because I'm not ready to talk to someone. And by the way, this is going to probably be polarizing to people that listen to this. And I'm aware of that and okay with it. But I don't want to talk to someone. I'm very self-aware. I know the problems I'm dealing with. And right now, still, almost 2 years later, I feel like if I go and get therapy, by the way, I have gotten therapy and seen therapists. I am a huge advocate of that. And it has benefited me so much in the past. But right now, where I'm at, if I go and do that, it feels like I'm trying to fix the grief. And I'm trying to get rid of the feelings that I'm having. And I'm not ready and I don't want to. And I wish people would stop telling me to go do it because they think that they know what's best. How about you come and live in my body and deal with what I'm dealing with? Then you can go and take yourself to counseling. But I don't want that right now. That's not, that's my prerogative, right?
I've also felt that at times it's like, I don't want to hear it. Like, I just want to go through what I'm going through. And having that force of hey, you should talk to someone. You should talk to this person or that person or this thing or whatever. As someone who has supported others going through grief and loss and have coached and mentored youth as well as adults, it's how can I meet someone where they're at, not meet someone where I'm at. Because if I'm feeling great then that's going to influence how I show up and be like, oh, well, I'm feeling good. So now you're going to meet me where I'm at versus I'm going to meet you where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something I'm working on and I'm not good at, but we need to keep that in our minds because we all process things differently. If you search, how does grief show up? It shows up, you'll get a list. You'll get a long list.
Mm-hmm.
It could be anger, depression. It could show up as insomnia. It can show up as depression. It could show up as it's not even affecting you externally.
Right.
But it could be ripping you apart internally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the invisible nature of grief.
For sure.
Is it shows up so differently. And you experienced a lot. And not just yourself physically, but also emotionally and with those around you.
Mm-hmm.
How did it show up for you, if you don't mind us going there? And
yeah.
I'm curious, how did grief show up for you?
I mean, in every way possible. I don't even know where to begin. When I learned about my aunt, it was unexpected, and it was a call at almost 11 o'clock at night, and I had already gone to bed, and I got the news and immediately went to the bathroom and started dry heaving. And, just like, it felt like the world, disbelief. I still, with the topic of my aunt, it's still disbelief, like almost like she's coming back. It's a very weird thing. And that brings on a lot of tears. I'm angry, very angry. Like, I pretty much cuss her out every day. Whatever explicit word you want to insert here, like, why did you leave? Like, why now? You don't know my son. Since the loss of, at 21 weeks, we've since had a child, which I'm so grateful for. And she doesn't know him. And that's so angering. And I know it's not her fault. Like, I know, she didn't commit suicide, so it's definitely not her fault, but I'm angry that she's not here. I needed her longer. So there's a lot of tears and a lot of emotion and a lot of hiding that I still feel that way, because 2 years later, who wants to talk about it, right? Like, even just saying I lost my aunt, people are like, cool, your aunt, like, are you that close to your aunt? Yeah, I was like so close to my aunt. FaceTimed multiple times a day, every single day. And she would come. Lived in Seattle at the time. She lived in Portland. That's a 3-hour drive. I mean, she'd be at our house staying with us every 6 weeks. Easy. Then move on to the loss of my son. I find myself actually asking the question of, which one do I grieve more? And my husband's like, I don't think you really need to answer that question. That one was more physical, right? Like, I had gained weight because I was pregnant. I then lost him. This is graphic, but I had to deliver him at home in my bathroom. Like, then your body responds when you have a loss, where you start, your body interprets it as you delivered a baby, right? So milk production, and then months later, hair falling out. And so there were constant reminders. So it's like, when my hair started falling out, it was like utter shock, and like shook me to my core, because it was like, are you kidding me? And so it's like anger, frustration, crying, just feeling just so over it, right? And then you're getting emails like, your baby's probably arrived, or mailers in the physical from USPS. It's like just so triggering. And so how does it manifest for me? It's just like physical, mental, emotional. And then there's the strain of like, I got to pull it together because my kids can't see me like this. Because there was a period of time, Mommy, are you crying again? What are you crying about? It's like, oh, like, not that I can't be emotional in front of my kids, because I can, but I also don't want them to remember this period of life where I was like just completely depressed, right? Like, they don't get it, and I shouldn't expect them to get it. I want them to be okay with crying and tears, but I also want them to have an enjoyable childhood. So like, get it together, Deanne. Like, you can cry when they go to bed or go to the bathroom and get it all out. And then like, when you need to go do school pickup and see all the other parents and you can't look like you were in tears, like, it's just, it manifests in every way, Tim. Like a very drawn out response there.
It's a very real response. And I know people listening will resonate with that, with what you're talking about. And they also resonate with the aspect of, okay, I'm grieving in silence, and now I need to put myself together to go out into the world and put on that smile and, grab my coffee and look like, oh, I've got it all together, where you don't. And I remember once we're at this gathering, and someone had asked, oh, how are you doing? And my wife said, not good. And this person was shocked. It was like, uh-oh, I just engaged in a conversation and I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
And so they were like, oh, and they walked away. I'm like, oh, that was, awkward. And this elderly lady was like, oh, hi, Tim and Tanya. How are you doing? And Tanya's like, well, not good. I can't remember the exact thing that was going on. And Tanya, my wife, just explained that, we're going through a really hard time, and was very open and honest. And this little old lady just put her arm around Tanya and said, tell me more. And just was like, let it out. And we didn't, I remember that was like 10 years ago, and we didn't have to hide. And in order to end the stigma around invisible conditions, and grief is one of those, we can't hide. We have to stop hiding. We have to embrace that of, yeah, today is crappy. Today is not a good day. And tomorrow might be a better day. But I'm not going to convince myself today that it needs to be better, because then I feel guilty about that. And then it manifests into, you kind of go down that spiral.
Right.
When I say that, I'm curious what comes up for you about just like owning it, because I'm terrible at it. I don't want help. I'm terrible at asking for help, for support. Yet I want others to say how they're feeling, because I want to not help them, but to support them.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a realist, more pessimist, I guess. And so I want the change, but do I really believe the change is coming? I'm just being honest with you, right? Like, I think what it looks like for me is speaking more, sharing more in an environment where I feel safe, right? A friend just came over earlier this week, and she kind of learned all this about me. We're newer friends. And she said, wow, like with all you've been through, like, it looks like you're doing really well, like, how are you doing? I'm like, yeah, not well, like survival, right? Like, I have my good days and my bad days. I mean, overall, like, I have so much to be grateful for. I have a very rich life, and I will never take that for granted. However, I'm just like one foot in front of the other, right? And she was like, oh, wow, like, that makes sense, like, thank you for sharing. So I think where I feel safe, where it's like, to your point, the lady that gave a hug and would listen, like, I have a decent read on people. So I'm just going to read the person and go, will they be able to handle it? Or am I willing to like give them a little shock value and then just give them something to think about, right? Like, not well, feel like shit, thanks. Like, just leave them with that little nugget for them to process later. So I guess it depends. Like, I want to be part of the solution, but I also want to protect myself. And that's the daily struggle that we have to deal with, right? Like, are we willing to put ourselves out there? What risk does that come with? And I'm not perfect at it. Could be a lot better.
It's interesting that you say what risk comes with it, because I've heard that from so many people who want to tell their story of living with an invisible condition, and they're weighing that risk. Is it worth the risk? And I'm booked 6 months in advance, so I think there's people saying, yeah, it's worth the risk. But I also hear from people saying it's not worth the risk. And what I say to people is, it's your story. We're going to honor your story. And if you choose to share your story in some way or another, that's great. If you choose not to, that's fine. You know, we can't just change society and say we're going to now force everyone to disclose their trauma, their grief, their conditions on their resume and their applications, and in order to create more inclusion. That's not going to work. Especially when you've gone through a lot of loss. And again, we all process things differently. I'm sure even in your household, your husband processed different than you. And other family members process different than you. And that's okay. And there's no expiration. I love that. There's no expiration date on whatever we've gone through in the past.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, you've shared vulnerably just about, you know, that physical change with loss. And you've then lost your aunt, and your son was in the hospital. And, you know, I know people who would have just said, tap out. I'm just going to run away, find a cabin in the woods and just be on my own. And yet you're here sharing openly and honestly. And I really appreciate you for that. There's a lot going through my mind right now as well. And so, you know, I think as we kind of wrap up the conversation around grief and loss, what's coming to mind around if somebody's going through something, what do you want to say to them? And what do you want to say to that person, but also those friends that are there to support them?
I'd say stop trying to feel like you need to have the perfect thing to say or a way to exist for that individual. That there is no perfect thing. And that just being there, even if silent, is really valuable. Showing up over and over again is really important, because the thing that I notice is that people will show up and then it fades. And the immediate is what we tend to respond to, right? But in my experience, I needed more later, when everyone forgot about what had happened for me. Not forgot, but, you know, like, life moves on. They didn't have loss, right? And so continuing to show up and check in. And I've had a couple of people that have done that in varying ways. And that's been meaningful. But stop thinking that you need to have some script or some one-liner that's going to solve everything, because it's just not possible. And then for the person grieving, just block out what isn't helpful and bring in more of what is. And if someone did something that was particularly helpful, said something, showed up in some way, really make it known how meaningful that was, and know that that's a person that you can go to for help. And it's okay to ask for help. I'm saying this, like, again, I don't do well at that. I also haven't done well to be a friend to others that have experienced loss and grief, and I'm learning. So learn. That's what's coming to mind, Tim. It's hard. So take it easy, give yourself some grace, and just show up.
Mm-hmm. It is hard. And if somebody is trying to sell you a 5-step program, that's nonsense.
Don't do it. I shouldn't say don't do it, but choose wisely, I guess.
Yes, choose wisely. That's sound, insight, and wisdom there. And I know I was vulnerable on LinkedIn, primarily LinkedIn, because there's so much superficial stuff on LinkedIn. It's like, here's 5 steps on how to build your team, and this is the magic bullet for this. If there was a magic bullet, we wouldn't need to talk about leadership and communication and new managers and all this stuff, right? There's if there was a magic bullet and all these experts had the right answers, we wouldn't need that platform anymore.
We wouldn't all be selling.
So we wouldn't all be selling. And so my stance on LinkedIn now is less selling and just more like, hey, this is what's top of mind. And I've lost followers. It's fine. I'm not out to like be a top voice and be, 30,000 people. I've only, that's not my goal. Yeah. It's how to be more vulnerable. And you took that step. You sent me a message that touched my heart. And it was like, hey, I'm here for you. And it wasn't like, hey, here's this book, or hey, try this app, or hey, because I received a lot of those. It was
interesting.
It was like, hey, I'm here. I hear you. Thank you for being vulnerable. And here we are. And I'm sure this is not the last conversation we're going to have, or this is the start of many conversations. And so, as we wrap up, I just want to say thank you so much for your openness. It's a raw story. It's a vulnerable moment for you.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate it, because I think this is going to resonate with people. And again, there's no like, here's 5 takeaways out of this episode on things you need to do.
Yeah.
If anything, the central theme is, if you're listening to someone or someone who's going through grief and loss, just pause what you're going to say, put your arm around them, either virtually or physically, and say, tell me more. I'm here for you.
I care about
just
you.
Listen.
Yeah, exactly.
I care about you.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And if you're going through something and you don't know where to turn to, if you don't have close friends, please reach out. You can head to invisiblecondition.com, send me a note there on Instagram, on LinkedIn, wherever you're listening to this or finding this, because I might not, I don't have the answers, but I'm good at listening. And so if you are struggling today, we'll put some resources in the show notes as well. And Deanne, if somebody wants to get a hold of you and their story resonates with them and they're interested about your podcast, where can people find you?
I have a website, and you can link it in the show notes, effinguppodcast.com. I'm on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and my email address is podcast.effingup@gmail.com.
Perfect. And yes, we'll link all that in the show notes. And so with that, thanks again for coming on. And for those who are listening, I always appreciate your messages of support. And if you have the means, we've got a donate button up on the website. These shows are only possible because of you and your generosity, as well as consider leaving us a rating. Ratings help get the podcast out there and really support just telling others that this is a show worth listening to. And so with that, Deanne, I hope you have a great day. And for those who are listening, I hope you have an amazing one too.
Thanks, Tim.